Hello and welcome to the video, Establishing Your Corporate Structure. We're going to talk about something called a corporate structure diagram and then the associated legal and tax structures for you to put into place to build your company for exit. We'll talk about why everyone, no matter how simple your business is, should have a corporate structure diagram. We'll talk about how to fill one out. And then finally, we'll talk about the legal and tax structures to get in place while not providing legal and tax advice, but more overall business advice for you so that you're knowledgeable when you work with those professionals. Even if your structure is simple, I recommend that you complete a corporate structure diagram. It sets the proper frame of mind and it doesn't take long to complete, but you'll always know that one of your responsibilities as an owner is to keep a visualization of your company on one page so that you can see it or that a buyer can see it. And then from there, if you make amendments to it or changes, you're already working from a strong base. It'll also ensure you to do the right step, which is to confirm with legal and tax resources that you're actually setting things up in the corporate structure. For example, should you be an LLC taxed as an S corporation or an LLC taxed as a partnership? And there are differences and trade-offs between both of those. And finally, it'll set the basis for your what's called your cap table, your capitalization table, which will allow you to visually see who owns what percentage of your company. The next slides, what we're going to do is we're going to walk through some example structures so you can actually see some of the templates in action. Okay, as I've talked about many times is simpler is often better. So as you can see here, and this is designed for U.S. Taxpayers. However, it's very easily modifiable for other people that have different types of entities in your own host country. So a single owner structure looks like this. You've got yourself as the individual in the circle. You've got your brand, as you can see, brand number 1. It's taxed as an S corporation, which is why it has the shape that it does. And underneath it, it happens to have 2 Seller Central accounts. Once again, the disclaimer, these are only ideas of how to structure things, but you should consult with a professional in order to get specific legal and tax advice. Very simple, document it. Takes about 2 minutes for you. List out the exact name of the entity. Verify that if you are making what's called an S corp election, that you've got that paperwork in place, and then verify that your Seller Central accounts are attached to those specific entity that you've got registered. Okay, now maybe let's make it a little bit more complex. You've got one owner and you've got brand 1. And the same owner has a consulting company. What you would do here is you would document in your corporate structure diagram. It will literally be a PowerPoint that looks like this that shows you at the top of both of them. It will also then show the name of the 2 entities, and it will spark a trigger that you know that you need in order to have the proper structure in place, a contractual relationship documented between these 2 entities. So if you can see when you fill out the corporate structure diagram, it's also telling you the things that you need to get in place to make it quote unquote official. The next one is that I've got multiple brands and I need to understand how to structure that. So as I've mentioned before, is if I've got a pets brand and I've got a brand that might be in organic pet food and they deserve to have separate brands for some reason, then you really deserve to have your brands separated into 2 different entities. As you can see here, I've got the same owner. I've got brand 1, I've got brand 2. They're both LLCs taxed as an S corporation, and I've got Seller Central accounts underneath each of them. Continuing on, we may decide to have a service company that then acts as a transactional relationship to both of those particular brands. So as you can see, now my corporate structure diagram shows myself as the owner at the top and the 3 different entities. Now, you may be asking, should I have 1 circle for myself as an owner or should I keep it as 3? And that's a little bit more how you want to look at it. I tend to like to see, the owner directly above the structure because I think it really delineates that they're not related to each other, as opposed to having one owner having the arrow to the different ones. To me, starts to feel like it might look like a holding company structure. These are not in any way a holding company structure. They are often referred to as siblings to each other. So you might hear the term sister corporations, but they're really contractually related, but they're not related in any hierarchical way. Now, you might go, okay, but what if I have multiple owners? So if I have two different owners, then what I need to do is I need to define what is the entity that these owners are in. And as you can see here, we've set up a new diagram for a partnership. It would be an LLC taxed as a partnership. So the two owners have an equity stake in that entity. And oftentimes what I like to do is draw the percentage of the ownership of each in the particular line so that you can define that. And then the partnership owns the seller central accounts. So hopefully this starts to give you an idea of the different ways that you can document your company. And the action item is to really then focus on creating a very simple corporate structure diagram. But most importantly, every time that you might take on a stockholder in the company, if you raise equity capital, or maybe you take on a key employee and they're a phantom equity person in there, or you start up a second brand, keep your corporate structure diagram up to date, because this is essentially the headline document that lets you know that you have legal and tax work to do in order to keep your company in compliance with the structure. And I would say it's very common with fast-moving entrepreneurial companies that people get into different types of structures, they never document them, and they don't get their information in place, and then it becomes harder and more costly to find or do later. So let's transition now from the corporate structure diagram document to the proper legal and tax structures that you want to get in place. Once you get your diagram complete, or anytime that you're updating it, there are a number of required documents that you're going to want to have in order to implement it. There are things like articles of incorporation with the state that you registered, or in another jurisdiction if you're in another country. There's something referred to as an operating agreement, which is absolutely critical if you have a partnership with somebody else, that you draft the operating agreement to make sure you know, in essence, what are the rules of the game. And depending on the type of company or where you're located, you may actually have to issue specific shares or certificates and keep those tracked in a specific place. The other thing that you need to do is you need to make sure that you have the proper tax registrations and certificates in place, and that they are attached to this particular entity. A good example of that is one that I mentioned earlier, is that if you're an LLC but you want to be taxed as an S corporation, there's actually what's called an S corp election that you file, and that makes sure that you get the efficiency of being taxed as an S corporation, and without it you will not get that same level of tax efficiency. Okay. The third thing that you have to recognize is that if you have multiple entities, oftentimes people never document the relationship between those entities. So, for example, if I have a service company that is serving multiple brands, I do need to have even a 1 or a 2-page agreement that says this is the time allocation that this person is going to be working on this brand versus that brand, and here's the cost that's being allocated into it for that particular service. So the action items that I'd like you to take now are to document any major agreements that you have in your business, document the relationships between the businesses, document the tax status of each, and then document the legal documentation that you need for each one of them. To complete this section of getting your exit strategy, mindset, and your business structures in place, the first thing you have to do is determine the right structure. Then, once you have the right structure and the right number of owners, you complete your corporate structure diagram. And then finally, you work with the legal and the tax professionals to make sure that you have the right agreements legally and the right tax and other types of contract documents in place. Finally, all of this goes into a place that is oftentimes referred to as your corporate book. And we'll be talking about something in other videos that Northbound offers called a virtual data room. And a data room is essentially very similar to a corporate book. It just happens to be a virtual version of that. So once you get all of this in place, there's a defined file structure that you want to utilize in order to make sure that you keep it organized in the logic that a buyer is eventually going to need to see it. Hopefully this video has been helpful for you to see very simple and visual diagrams of your business in establishing your corporate structure. And if you're going to build your business right from the outset, determine the right amount of corporate structure, and then get those structures in place and maintain them as your business grows. Thank you.